Imagine a prison that pushes human endurance to the brink, thereby making it difficult and almost impossible for an inmate to survive beyond the first day. From Las Sabaneta Prison in Venezuela, notorious for being run by prisoners themselves, to Black Dolphin in Russia, where inmates suffer unrelenting psychological torment, each of these prisons tells a haunting story of extreme conditions and human suffering. Let's dive into them. Las Sabaneta Prison in Venezuela, also known as the Maracaibo National Prison, was a notoriously violent prison in Venezuela. Like a typical Venezuelan prison, it was severely overcrowded, with inmates lacking adequate access to medical care, food, and clean water. Therefore, violence among prisoners was common. One peculiar thing about the prison facility is how it was being run by the prisoners themselves. There were gangs among inmates, each led by a pran, which is an inmate leader. Mucho Edwin was one such pran, notorious for drug sales and prostitution throughout his time in the prison. The ongoing activities of gangs would later result in a riot on January 3, 1994. A group of inmates started a fire and subsequently shot or stabbed other inmates who tried to escape the fire. While the exact number of casualties and injuries is debated, many more prisoners were killed when security forces tried to regain control. Some sources say over 150 people died. In 2013, 69 more prisoners were killed due to the lack of security personnel, which resulted in gang violence. Following this riot, the prison was closed. However, before the eventual shutdown, raids by government forces yielded massive amounts of weapons, drugs, and a collection of jungle animals, including a few endangered species. While La Sabaneta was a nightmare of violence and chaos, the next prison is even more terrifying due to its sheer isolation and cruelty. Camp 22 in North Korea, officially known as Kwanliso Penal Labor Colony No. 22, was considered a death camp in North Korea. It is so because it was completely isolated from the outside world. The camp was founded around 1965 in Hangyong-ri, and by the 1990s it had expanded into the areas of Chungbong-ri and Sangno-ri. Former guard An Myung-chol described the conditions in the camp as harsh and life-threatening. He estimated that about 30% of the prisoners had deformities, such as torn-off ears, smashed eyes, crooked noses, and faces covered with cuts and scars resulting from torture. He also said around 2,000 prisoners had missing limbs, and even prisoners who obviously needed walking aids were still forced to work. It was also estimated that between 1,500 and 2,000 inmates often died of malnutrition there every year, mostly children. Inmates had to do hard manual labor in agriculture, mining, and inside factories for 15 hours every day. And the only holiday was New Year's Day. Inmates subjected to water torture had to stand on their toes in a tank filled with water up to their noses for 24 hours. If a fire occurred or a tunnel collapsed, prisoners were abandoned inside and left to die. Kwon Hyuk, a former security officer, reported that corpses were loaded into cargo coaches with coal to be burned in a melting furnace. While Camp 22 in North Korea was a place of unthinkable suffering, the next prison is a true hell on earth, where inmates face a daily struggle for survival. Gitarama Prison in Rwanda. This particular prison is said to be one of the deadliest in the world, and the reason is not far-fetched. According to reports, the maximum capacity of the jail is only 600, whereas between 6,000 and 7,000 inmates are locked inside it. What was initially built in 1960 as accommodation for British workers who were in the country suddenly became a prison housing some of the country's most violent criminals. Including rapists, robbers, and murderers, inmates spend most of their time standing due to a shortage of space. More troubling is the fact that the inmates frequently indulge in deadly fights and even go as far as eating the dead bodies of prisoners killed in order to stay alive. Bridget Tron, then of the International Committee of the Red Cross, once decried the inhumane conditions at the facility, which claimed the lives of between 6 to 8 prisoners daily. That being said, most of the inmates suffer from gangrene, and this is because they often remain barefoot. Unfortunately, there are widespread reports that some of the inmates are completely innocent, although local commander Charles Yonga of Garama in the mid-1990s heartbreakingly admitted it. He emphatically said that the vast majority of them are killers. Despite numerous protests by human rights organisations against the deplorable conditions inside the jail, nothing serious has been done to improve the conditions. While Garama Prison pushes the limits of human endurance, the next prison is a fortress of unrelenting surveillance and physical torment. Black Dolphin Prison in Russia, Penal Colony Number 6 of the Federal Penitentiary Service of Russia in Orenburg Oblast, commonly known as Black Dolphin Prison, is a correctional facility and one of the first in Orenburg Oblast to accept prisoners with life sentences. The prison houses an estimated 700 of Russia's worst criminals, including child molesters, murderers, terrorists, cannibals, and serial killers. All inmates at the facility are serving sentences of life imprisonment. Inmates are kept isolated in cells that have a set of 3 steel doors and are placed under 24-hour surveillance and supervision. Not only that, but inmates are also forced to stand and are forbidden from resting or sitting on their bunks from the time they wake until it's time to go to bed, which is roughly 16 hours of physical activity. Prison guards place blindfolds on arriving inmates so that they have no idea of the prison's layout. Even when they are transported between buildings, they remain blindfolded. When being escorted by prison guards, inmates are kept bent over at the waist and their hands are handcuffed behind their backs, higher than their hips. Alexander Masick, a former inmate, committed 2 murders while incarcerated at Black Dolphin before he died of undisclosed causes. While Black Dolphin Prison enforces extreme physical discipline, the next prison takes psychological torment to an entirely new level. Bang Kwang Prison in Thailand, nicknamed the Bangkok Hilton, is the site of the men's death row and the execution chamber of Thailand. As of 2018, it housed about 6,000 inmates. All inmates are mandated to wear leg irons for the first 3 months of their sentences. However, as for death row inmates, they were required to have their leg irons permanently welded on, a practice that only ended in 2013. In the book The Damage Done, former prisoner and drug courier Warren Fellows recounts that the prison was nicknamed Big Tiger by the Thais because it prowled and ate inmates. Fellows' associate Paul Hayward also served part of his sentence there. In 1995, a British man named Alan John Davies was placed on death row at Bang Kwang, becoming the first European to receive a death sentence in Thailand. However, after 17 years of hell in the prison, he was released and subsequently returned to the UK in 2007 after being granted amnesty by the King. As of March 2018, 510 persons remained on death row. Chad Jaruban, the last executioner in Thailand to have carried out an execution by shooting, died in 2012, having executed 55 prisoners during his career. While Bang Kwang tortures its inmates with the constant fear of death, the next prison's legacy is built on relentless physical abuse and dehumanization. Diyarbakir Prison in Turkey, established in 1980 as an E-type prison, became a martial law military prison until 1988, when control was returned to the Ministry of Justice. In the early and mid-1980s, particularly between 1981 and 1984, inmates at the facility were exposed to horrific acts of systematic torture that led the Times to categorize it among the 10 most notorious jails in the world. During those years, 34 prisoners lost their lives. Some of the most common torture methods included severe and systematic beatings, hair pulling, death threats, water and food deprivation for extensive periods, excessive exercise in extreme temperatures and stress positions, or forcing prisoners to stand for long durations. Betir Tan, the father of Kurdish writer Alan Tan, lost his life in this prison as a result of torture following the military coup of 1980. The number of people who died while being interrogated or incarcerated increased. No less than 299 inmates died due to the unsanitary conditions and torture in the prison. 14 died during hunger strikes, 16 were shot to death because they allegedly attempted to escape, and 43 committed suicide. On May 18, 1982, 4 young prisoners, M. Zangan, Ezra Anik, Fat CTE, and Naona, burned themselves alive in protest. On September 24, 1996, some members of a special team of gendarmes and prison wardens allegedly stormed the facility, killing 10 inmates and wounding 46 prisoners. While Diyarbakir prison is infamous for its systematic torture, the next prison is equally brutal, but with a history steeped in political violence and tragic events. Nairobi Prison in Kenya, officially known as Kamiti Maximum Security Prison, has held many political prisoners, including Hussein Onyango Obama, Kenneth Matiba, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and Jonah Anguka. The prison, which was built for 1,400 prisoners, now houses over 3,600 inmates in poor living conditions. Many executions have been carried out in the prison, notable among them being that of Mau Mau rebel leader Dedan Kimathi, who was hanged by the British colonial administration on February 18, 1957. Similarly, Hezekiah Uka and Panas U. Okumu were executed there on May 17, 1987. Within the prison, there is a particular cell called Condemned G Block, notorious for its brutal lifestyle. On the 17th of November 2008, a search was carried out in G Block for mobile phones after the moment when officers were brutalizing inmates was captured on mobile phone video and sent to the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, KNCHR, subsequently shown on Kenyan TV. Karume Wanjuki, who was the longest-serving and to-date last hangman at Kamiti, died in 2009. That same year, at least 8 inmates died as a result of a cholera outbreak at the prison. While Nairobi Prison symbolizes political strife and brutality, the next prison is infamous for its terrifying history of injustice and neglect. Petek Island Prison in Russia. Often referred to as the Alcatraz of Russia, Petek Island holds the most dangerous criminals in Russia. Apart from the mental torture of almost 23 hours a day, where inmates are locked in twin rooms, most inmates are only allowed 2 visitors per year, which is the only contact with the outside world they can ever hope for. The prison itself is hopelessly inescapable as it is surrounded by the freezing waters of White Lake. One-time head guard Vasily Smirnov once said that guards would shoot at any inmate who tried to swim. One inmate named Vladimir talked about how the prison would soon become his mausoleum, which tells you how horrible the conditions in the prison are. Inmates who don't follow the rules are locked in a small dark room for 15 days with only a metal bucket and a wooden perch to sit on. In addition to the sheer isolation suffered by inmates, they also have limited access to basic facilities, especially bathrooms, which contributes to the spread of tuberculosis among half of the inmates. Although the prison is reputed for doing everything possible to keep inmates safe from the violence, rape, and abuse that often occur in most prisons, the psychological anguish suffered by inmates there is enough to break even the most hardened of them. While Petek Island is infamous for its mental anguish and isolation, the next prison in the USA stands out for its violence and systemic abuse, Rikers Island in the USA. As one of the largest correctional facilities in the world, Rikers Island is notorious for violence, physical and mental abuse, as well as the neglect of its inmates. In fact, these conditions have attracted press and judicial scrutiny over the years, resulting in numerous rulings against the New York City government. On June 1, 2007, Captain Sherman Graham and Assistant Deputy Warden Gail Lewis were arrested for covering up an assault on an inmate. In February 2008, Correctional Officer Lloyd Nicholson was indicted for allegedly using a group of teenage inmates as enforcers under a regime called the Program, which was used by inmates to control other inmates. Some inmates were beaten to death, while others died as a result of harsh conditions. One such inmate was Khalif Browder, who was accused of stealing a backpack at the age of 16. Due to his family's inability to post his $3,000 bail, he was imprisoned without trial or conviction for 3 years at Rikers Island. Eventually, he was released in June 2013 after his case was dismissed. However, 2 years later, Browder died by suicide, by hanging, with allegations that the conditions of his detention caused his mental deterioration as he had multiple suicide attempts while incarcerated. Another inmate, Bradley Ballard, died at the age of 39 after being confined in his cell for 7 days without access to his medication or medical treatment. While Rikers Island is plagued by violence and neglect, the next prison is remembered for its catastrophic incidents and grim past: Carandiru Prison in Brazil. Officially known as São Paulo House of Detention, Carandiru Prison was designed as a model prison to meet the new demands of the 1890 Criminal Code. Draucio Varela, a noted Brazilian physician, volunteered as an unpaid physician in Carandiru from 1989 to 2001, particularly to address its AIDS epidemic. He later wrote a book titled Carandiru Station in English, where he describes his experiences there and the dreadful conditions of the inmates. Joel Vieira, a former inmate at Carandiru, recalled how inmates rarely saw the sun. In 1992, the prison became the site of the Carandiru massacre, which left 111 prisoners dead. The incident started with a fight between two groups of inmates led by Luis Tavares de Avila, known as Coelho, Rabbit, and Antonio Luis Nazim, known as Barba, Whiskers. Within an hour, the fight escalated into a prison riot that lasted 3 hours. Many more riots would follow in subsequent years. After years of national and international pressure, the prison was eventually demolished on the 8th of December, 2002, with only one block left standing to be used as a museum, now open to the public. In contrast to Carandiru's violent history, the next prison was known for its unique and brutal approach to imprisonment and execution: Old Sparky's House in the USA. The infamous U.S. prison, located on the banks of the Hudson River, was a facility where inmates were forced to horrifically build their own confinement. The prison put to death about 614 inmates, both men and women, via Sing Sing's electric chair, a piece of deadly equipment known as Old Sparky. When the prison was constructed in 1825, the first group of inmates consisted of 100 men who were transported from New York's Auburn prison. However, upon arrival, there were no cells to hold them, which is why they were forced to build their own prison walls. Early inmates at the facility were subjected to complete silence, an act dubbed the Auburn Method and enforced by guards brandishing whips. During the day, inmates spent hours working under the baking heat on the site. High-profile executions at the facility include Julius and Ethel Rosenberg in 1953 for being involved in espionage for the Soviet Union in nuclear weapon research. The following year, Guard Puff was executed for the murder of an FBI agent. The last person executed in the state was Eddie Lee Mays, a convicted murderer. However, with the abolition of the death penalty in 1972, Old Sparky was moved to another facility but was never used again. While Old Sparky's house was infamous for its execution practices, the next prison was notorious for its inescapability and harsh treatment: Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary in the USA. United States Penitentiary. Alcatraz Island, also known simply as Alcatraz or the Rock, was intended for inmates who continuously caused trouble at other federal prisons. It was considered a last resort prison to hold the worst of the worst criminals, with no hope of rehabilitation. Alcatraz gained notoriety as the toughest prison in the US, such that many considered it the world's most fearsome prison of its time. Former prisoners reported how they were subjected to brutality and inhumane conditions, which severely tested their sanity. Ed Wutker was the first prisoner to commit suicide in the facility. Rufus Percival chopped off his fingers with an axe he grabbed from a fire truck. On December 3, 1940, Henry Young murdered another inmate named Rufus McCain. Young, who had been sent to Alcatraz for a murder he committed in 1933, stabbed McCain in the neck at the tailor's shop where McCain worked. McCain died 5 hours later. Correctional officers attested that once a convict arrived at Alcatraz Wharf, their first thought was how to leave, reflecting how horrible the conditions were. During its 29 years of operation, no prisoner successfully escaped. Out of 36 escape attempts, 23 prisoners were caught, 6 were shot and killed, 2 drowned, and 5 are listed as missing and presumed drowned. While Alcatraz was known for its harsh conditions and security, the next prison was known for its extreme brutality and human rights abuses, Tadmor Military Prison in Syria. The prison was originally built as military barracks by the French Mandate forces. However, by the early and late 1980s, thousands of Syrian prisoners, both political and criminal, were housed at Tadmor Military Prison. The prison was notorious for harsh conditions, extensive human rights abuses, torture, and summary executions. So alarming were the conditions that a 2001 report by Amnesty International described it as a source of despair, torture, and degrading treatment. Palestinian writer Salameh Clay, who spent 2 years in the prison from 1998 to 2000 after being accused of opposing the goals of the revolution that brought Assad's Ba'ath Party to power, described the prison thus: "It's utterly unfair to call it a prison. In a prison, you have basic rights, but in Tadmor, you have nothing. You're only left with fear and horror." On June 27, 1980, members of units of the defense brigades under the command of Rifat al-Assad attacked Tadmor prison at dawn, killing an estimated 1,000 prisoners in the cells and dormitories. In May 2015, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant captured Tadmor and also took over the prison. It would later release a video of its interior, showing the harsh conditions in which inmates lived. Eventually, ISIL militants blew up the prison complex with explosives on May 30th. In contrast to Tadmor's brutal history, the next prison is known for its harsh conditions and severe treatment of political prisoners, Evin Prison in Iran. The prison has been the main housing unit for Iran's political prisoners since 1972. It was originally designed to house 320 inmates, 302 in large communal blocks and 20 in solitary cells. However, under the Islamic Republic of Iran, the prison population exploded to 15,000 inmates. According to scholar Ervand Abrahamian, in theory, Evin was a detention center for those awaiting trial. In reality, Evin served as a regular prison, as many waited years before being brought to trial. One notable prisoner at Evin was Marina Nemat, who spent 2 years in Evin for participating in anti-regime protests at her school. She would later write about her torture and the death of her fellow students at the prison. Another former inmate at the facility, former Iranian nurse Hangame Mahaja Hassan, also wrote about her incarceration in 1981 after being arrested for suspected connections with the Mojahedin. According to her, members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard frequently and systematically tortured female inmates. She also describes a series of mass executions in Unit 209. Every day, about 6 p.m. at dinner time, we heard an enormous and deafening noise like a lorry shedding a heavy load of metal. It was the discharge of tens of firearms being fired at once on our friends. While Evin Prison is known for its harsh treatment of political prisoners, the next prison is notorious for its overcrowding and neglect, Monrovia Central Prison in Liberia. At Monrovia Central Prison, about 1,400 inmates are crammed into a space initially built for less than 400. With the outside of the prison given a facelift and the shining light grey walls, passers-by might think that things are equally bright inside, but that's not the case. While speaking with journalists, an unidentified inmate who had spent 3 years in the prison after being convicted on rape charges recounted how inmates experienced food shortages. "The government feeds us 1 plate of rice every day, 1 time a day," he said. As he spoke, a dozen other inmates nodded in agreement. Even Varney G. Lake, who is in charge of the prison, admitted that the overcrowding experienced in the facility amounted to a human rights violation. In December 2022, the prison refused to take in new inmates because of overcrowding. That same year, a report by the US State Department on Human Rights found that there were times when inmates had to sleep in shifts due to overcrowding. In addition, both inmates and warders also lacked access to medical facilities. On different occasions, inmates have protested against the harsh conditions they continue to suffer in prison. In contrast to Monrovia Central's overcrowding, the next prison is known for its gang violence and overcrowding, Ciudad Barrios in El Salvador. Located in San Miguel, El Salvador, Ciudad Barrios Prison is notorious for housing members of the Mara Salvatrucha gang, also known as MS-13. Originally designed to hold 800 inmates, the prison now houses over 2,500, making it one of the most overcrowded and violent prisons in the country. From 2004 to 2015, Ciudad Barrios exclusively housed MS-13 members as part of El Salvador's policy of segregating gang members in prisons, a policy that has since been reversed. Inside the prison, gang members have established their own order. With a prisoner-to-guard ratio of 50-1, the guards exert minimal control, often remaining outside the facility while the gang runs operations within. They've organised essential services like a bakery, a basic rehabilitation program, and even a hospital, all managed by the inmates themselves. The military supports the guards, manning sentry points to maintain some semblance of order. The prison has also played a crucial role in the ongoing truce negotiations between MS-13 and the rival 18th Street Gang, with MS-13 leadership largely incarcerated here. Ciudad Barrios has become a focal point in El Salvador's broader efforts to address gang violence and its devastating impact on the country. Although gang leaders Ayla Gomez and Francisco Uro Quintero once told journalists how both gangs are trying to live together, Ciudad Barrios is controlled by gangs. The next prison is known for its unique self-governance and chaotic environment, San Pedro Prison in Bolivia. This prison is not a typical prison. It's a city within walls, where surviving even a single day can be a challenge. Unlike other prisons, at San Pedro, inmates must fend for themselves. The prison was originally designed to hold 600 inmates and now holds nearly 3,000. To begin with, there's no assigned housing. Inmates have to buy or rent their cells. In other words, the poorest inmates end up in the most dangerous areas where violence and drug use are rampant. The prison is self-governed by elected inmate committees. But this doesn't translate into safety. The primary method of enforcing rules is through violence, often by stabbing. The prison guards only patrol the perimeter, leaving the internal workings to the inmates themselves, which often leads to a lawless environment. Life inside is also marked by extreme disparities in wealth. While some inmates live in luxury with private bathrooms and cable TV, others are crammed into tiny, overcrowded cells. New inmates, for instance, might be lost in this chaotic society, struggling to find a place to sleep or someone to trust. Additionally, the prison is rife with corruption. Bribes are common, and without money, getting basic necessities or even protection is nearly impossible. Whereas San Pedro is a self-governed, city-like prison, the next prison is known for its severe conditions and brutal treatment, Al Harrowing Prison in Saudi Arabia. Surviving a day at Al Harrowing Prison, Saudi Arabia's largest maximum security facility, is no easy task. Located south of Riyadh, this prison is infamous for its harsh conditions and the brutal treatment of inmates. Prisoners, including political dissidents, journalists, and even members of the royal family, are subjected to a relentless combination of psychological and physical torture. The prison is equipped with isolation cells and rooms specifically designed for physical torture, ensuring that inmates endure constant suffering. Many detainees are held without charges or any hope of release, adding to the overwhelming sense of despair. One such victim was Princess Basma bint Saud bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, a 56-year-old Saudi royal family member, who was allegedly detained in March 2019 without any charges. The prison's dark history includes a devastating fire in September 2003, which claimed the lives of 67 inmates. Despite attempts to portray the facility as humane, reports from past prisoners paint a grim picture of the daily reality inside. Even though some cells may appear Spartan but clean, the truth lies in the unseen, the constant mistreatment, and the psychological toll of indefinite detention. For inmates at Al Harrowing, every day is a battle for survival, with the ever-present threat of torture, isolation, and the complete uncertainty of their fate. In contrast to Al Hayer's brutality, the next prison is known for its severe isolation and harsh living conditions. These jails are some of the harshest places on Earth. Unfortunately, some couldn't make it out alive. Now that you've seen just how deadly this prison is, the real question remains. Could anyone truly survive beyond 24 hours inside these walls of horror? The stories we've uncovered are just the tip of the iceberg, and there's always more lurking in the dark. So, if you want to uncover the mysteries behind the most terrifying prisons on Earth, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and don't forget to turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay curious, but don't get too close. See you in the next one.